An alien took me to TRAPPIST-1e, and what I discovered there about Jesus will keep you up at night. I thought I understood faith, death, and the universe until the moment my room twisted open and that being pulled me across the stars. What I saw on that distant world shattered everything humanity believes about God, creation, and our purpose. Because the truth wasn't hidden on Earth. It was buried in a place no human was ever meant to reach. Before we dive into this revelation, like this video, share it with someone who thinks we're alone, and don't forget to subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Now take a breath, because what happened when I stepped onto TRAPPIST-1e is where the story truly begins. I remember waking the way a drowning man surfaces, not with breath but with a desperate hunger for air that never comes. My chest refused to rise. My lungs felt sealed shut. For a moment I thought I was dying, that everything I had learned about the final minutes of consciousness was beginning again. But nothing about the room around me felt familiar. The walls shivered like they were made of liquid heat. Corners folded into themselves, shadows bent in impossible angles, as if frightened of the light swelling between them. And then, the light grew brighter, blooming into geometric patterns so luminous and complex that my eyes watered before instinct forced them closed. When I opened them again, he was standing beside my bed. Tall, silent, radiating a calm that was not comforting but overwhelming. The same being who had once revealed the truth of what comes after death. The same presence whose voice I had tried for years to forget. I knew instantly that this was no dream, no hallucination, no echo of memory. He was here, and he was not here for reassurance. Something in the air tasted sharper, urgent, almost metallic, as if reality itself had been peeled back only for him to step through. Before I could speak, before I could even form a thought, a pressure gripped my wrist. Not painful, yet so absolute, it felt like the command of a star collapsing inward. My consciousness tore upward in a single violent pull, yanked free from the weight of my own body. I watched myself, slumped on the mattress, eyes half open, mouth frozen mid-gasp. Then the room shattered, not exploded or faded. Shattered, like glass hit by a silent force, scattering into fragments of light that carried me away. What replaced it was a void so vast the human mind is not meant to witness it. A place without direction, without time, without anything except a single horrific vision burning in the center of the darkness. A cross suspended above an endless alien ocean, burning with a light that did not flicker but pulsed like something alive. Waves beneath it glowed with colors no language on earth has ever named. And standing on those impossible waters was a figure I recognized instantly, and yet could not comprehend. The face was unmistakable, but the form was not human. Taller, brighter, wrapped in a resonance that felt older than history. My mind trembled, my thoughts fractured. Something deep inside me tried to retreat, to flee back into the safety of ignorance. But the alien's voice surrounded me, inside me, through me, calm, in a way that terrified more than any threat ever could. You were never meant to see this. You were never meant to know. But now, you must. Sleep had claimed me only moments before the impossible rupture. Yet now the boundary between dreaming and waking felt thinner than mist. I found myself suspended in a limbo, where half of my awareness still clung to the familiar outline of my room, while the other half drifted into something vast, cold, and pulsing with fractal patterns that breathed like living equations. The floor beneath me remained, but it shimmered, dissolving into shifting tessellations that rose and fell like tides made of geometry instead of water. My bed existed and did not exist. My ceiling stretched into infinity one moment and folded into a crystalline point the next. Reality had become a membrane, and I was caught on both sides of it. The alien presence that towered beside me radiated an intelligence that pressured my thoughts, not forcefully, but with the quiet certainty of something that had witnessed the birth and death of worlds. Every wave of energy from him made the air tremble, as if the atoms themselves recognized him and rearranged in acknowledgement. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, to question whether my mind had finally surrendered to some deep internal fracture. But no words formed. I was held between states, between breaths, between dimensions. Then the truth poured into me without language, without sound, without permission. He did not need to explain through speech. His thoughts arrived, fully formed, shaping themselves around my understanding. What I had seen in that first terrible vision was not an omen or metaphor, not a hallucination born from a terrified brain scrambling for meaning. It was a memory, a real event, something that had once happened on a world humans have long forgotten or perhaps never knew. The cross of living fire suspended above the alien sea had been witnessed before, remembered by civilizations far older than ours, carried through time like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. My surroundings flickered again. The fractal dimension pulled harder, tugging my perception away from the physical world. My room faded to a faint ghost, while the other plane sharpened, revealing swirling currents of light that moved like creatures and structures at the same time. The colors were impossible, vibrating in frequencies my eyes were never designed to perceive, yet somehow I understood them. They were not colors, they were forms of information. The alien's presence intensified, and through that silent communication he let me feel the weight of his purpose. He was not a dream visitor, not an echo from my past encounter. He was something older, something bound to laws I could barely grasp, and his return meant that the line between the human and the cosmic had already been crossed. The memory he showed me was only the beginning, and whatever world it belonged to was calling again. I felt the dimension around me tighten, as if the fabric of reality sensed a boundary being approached that no human consciousness was ever supposed to reach. The alien presence pressed deeper into my awareness, not with force but with an inevitability that felt older than memory itself. Fractal currents pulsed in slow, deliberate waves, and every pulse carried something I had forgotten, something I had once begged to know but never understood. Then the truth surfaced in my mind like a long-buried echo breaking through dark water. I had asked for this, not tonight, not in this room, not in this life as I understood it. I had asked for answers years ago, during a moment I had spent most of my adult existence trying to rationalize away. A moment doctors described in clinical language, a moment I wrote off as hallucination from a failing brain, but a moment that had never truly left me. The night I nearly died, I remembered the hospital lights blurring into streaks of white. I remembered the feeling of falling inward into myself. And I remembered a voice without sound whispering that I would return, but only when the time was right. That promise had followed me through the years like a shadow. I dismissed it, buried it, convinced myself it was a dream created by a starving brain pleading for oxygen. But now, in this fractured dimension that breathed like a living organism, the alien made it clear that what I had interpreted as imagination had been a request, a plea, and it had been heard. The near-death moment had not been an accident of biology. It had been an opening. In that brief separation between body and consciousness, I had asked questions no human was meant to ask. Questions about the afterlife, about creation, about Jesus, about the beings who seemed woven into humanity's myths, yet always remained hidden. And the request was not rejected. It was simply delayed, pending, awaiting approval from forces beyond my comprehension. Tonight, that approval had come. The alien allowed me to feel the magnitude of it, not as a vision, not as a metaphor. This was not another shared illusion or mental projection. This was a crossing, a physical relocation of consciousness, a transport of the self to a world beyond the solar system, far outside the reach of anything human science could detect or imagine. The fractal currents around me shifted, swirling into a pattern that felt strangely ceremonial. My room had nearly faded completely now, its last remaining outlines dissolving into shimmering threads. The other dimension grew sharper, brighter, as if preparing to receive me. The air vibrated with something that resembled permission. An opening. A door that had been locked since long before my birth. I felt the alien's intention envelop me. The journey I had unknowingly initiated in the moment between life and death years ago was no longer theoretical. It was happening. And whatever waited on the other side of this forbidden passage, it was something no human mind was meant to return from unchanged. The crossing had begun. The final thread anchoring me to my own flesh loosened with a sensation so subtle, I almost missed it. One moment, I felt the faint echo of my heartbeat, slow and struggling, a distant drum fading into silence. The next, there was nothing. No pulse, no breath, no weight. My body became an empty garment on the bed below. A vessel I recognized, but no longer inhabited. I observed it from above, detached, strangely unburdened, as if I had slipped out of a long-worn mask and finally seen the face beneath it. There was no fear in the separation, only the realization that I had crossed a threshold that human language has no true name for. My chest no longer rose. My limbs no longer twitched. My heart hovered in a state just above stillness, slowed to a rhythm so quiet it was indistinguishable from the first whispers of death. Yet I felt more alive than I ever had within the confines of bone and blood. Consciousness expanded outward, shedding its former boundaries like dust in a widening beam of light. The alien presence guided this shift with a certainty that made the impossible feel almost natural. His energy wrapped around me, stabilizing the fragile state my awareness had entered. Without that support, I sensed I would have scattered into the surrounding void, dissolving into 1,000 incoherent fragments. Instead, I drifted in a controlled stillness, suspended between what I had been and what I was becoming. Below me, my room continued its silent collapse. The walls flickered into transparent layers. The bed dissolved into thin sheets of radiance. My body remained the last solid thing, pale and motionless, a lifeless silhouette that no longer belonged to me. I took in the scene with an eerie neutrality. It was not grief, not fear. It was the unsettling awareness that I had crossed a line that the living rarely glimpse and almost never return from. Then everything broke. A fissure tore through the dim air, not with sound, but with a rending of space itself. The room cracked open like a shell, revealing a void that pulsed with currents of dark light. There was no floor, no sky, no direction, only a vast emptiness that seemed to breathe. The alien moved forward without hesitation, and I was pulled with him, drawn into the opening by an unseen force that recognized my newly unbound state. The void wrapped around us, swallowing what remained of the physical world. Sensations shifted into forms I could no longer define. Motion existed without movement. Distance expanded, yet remained fixed. It felt as though we were falling inward and outward at the same time, propelled by a physics that ignored every rule Earth had ever known. Part of me searched instinctively for my lost heartbeat, for the comfort of gravity, for the familiar weight of being human. None returned. Instead, an immense awareness unfolded, stretching across a darkness filled with silent potential. The alien's presence steadied me as the fabric of existence warped into something I sensed was not a destination, but a corridor. The journey had begun, and there was no body left to return to until it was complete. The void that carried us felt endless, until, without warning, it wasn't a void at all. A subtle pressure shifted around my awareness, like the faint change in air before a door opens. Then the darkness thinned, folded, and peeled away, revealing a vision so enormous and intricate that for a moment I doubted I had ever truly understood what a star system was. We emerged before a shimmering lattice suspended in the emptiness of deep space, an immense web of light made from threads so fine yet so powerful that they looked like the skeletal blueprint of the universe itself. The structure pulsed with a rhythm that felt alive, each vibration echoing through the fabric of my consciousness. Beyond this cosmic lattice, arranged in perfect harmony, I saw them, 7 planets orbiting a dim red star, each one glowing with its own muted color. They did not move chaotically like the worlds I had studied in school books. They rotated in synchronized resonance, as though guided by a shared breath. Their orbits aligned with the lattice lines, creating patterns too precise to be accidents of celestial mechanics. It was like watching a celestial instrument play a sound too vast to be heard by human ears. The alien's presence expanded beside me, radiating a sense of solemn recognition. Though he did not speak with a mouth, his meaning flowed directly into me, shaped by an ancient weight I could feel more than understand. This place was not a discovery, it was a return. The lattice was not a boundary to keep intruders out. It was a membrane designed to shield something sacred within. And the beings who created it were not strangers to humanity. They were part of our earliest stories, woven into myths, disguised as miracles. As my awareness drifted closer, the planets sharpened in detail. One world shimmered with oceans reflecting faint crimson light. Another gleamed with icy continents. Another burned softly with volcanic glow. They seemed arranged intentionally, like steps on a path leading to something central. And that center was the star itself, small but dense, beating like a slow, ancient heart. The alien filled my mind with images that flashed too quickly for thought, yet lingered as truths I could not deny. Early humans standing under primitive skies, strange, luminous beings descending in forms they could not comprehend, messages delivered through symbols, visions, dreams, prophets awakening with clarity they could not explain, civilizations built around fragments of teachings they barely understood. None of it was mythology. None of it was metaphor. All of it began here, in this star system that humans had only recently discovered through telescopes, unaware that it was the cradle of their oldest mysteries. The shimmering lattice shifted slightly as though sensing our presence, each thread rippling outward in a cascade of light. It was not a gate in the human sense. It was more like a living threshold that recognized consciousness rather than identity. The alien's energy adjusted around me, anchoring my awareness as the system seemed to acknowledge him with a resonance of its own. He was known to it, expected. I was not. Yet something within the lattice softened, widening its geometry as if granting passage. A realization settled through me like a cold, slow tide. The beings who once guided Earth's earliest prophets had not vanished. They had simply returned home. And now, impossibly, I was standing at the threshold of that home, about to enter the place where humanity's oldest answers had been waiting for thousands of years. The lattice drifted behind us as silently as a held breath, and the vast symphony of the TRAPPIST system unfolded with an intimacy I was not prepared for. The alien guided my awareness toward one planet in particular, a world glowing blue and white, as if lit from within. Swirling silver clouds wrapped the surface in slow spirals, reflecting the faint red starlight like silk drifting across a cosmic stage. I felt drawn toward it, not by gravity, but by something deeper. Something that felt almost like recognition. As we descended, the colors sharpened into impossible clarity. The oceans shimmered with a luminescence that rippled even without sunlight, glowing in shades of turquoise and pale sapphire that seemed alive. In the darkness of space, they pulsed softly, as though the planet itself exhaled light with every rotation. Beneath the cloud layers, the continents emerged in sharp relief. Mountain ranges rose like colossal vertebrae of some ancient being, their ridges glowing with faint lines that pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves. At first I thought it was reflection, or heat, or some atmospheric illusion. But as my perception drew closer, the truth settled upon me with a cold strangeness. Those mountains were moving, not fast enough to see at a glance, but subtly, like the slow contraction of a sleeping giant. Their glow brightened and dimmed with a cadence that mimicked breath. The ground itself, the very bones of the planet, seemed to be alive. The alien let the realization seep into me without interference, allowing my thoughts to collide and reorganize around the impossibility before me. The world below was not passive matter shaped by geological forces. It was aware. Not conscious in the way humans define consciousness, bound by neurons and chemical pulses, but something broader, older, distributed through layers of rock and water and energy. The planet sensed us, not by sight or sound, but by presence. A faint vibration pressed into my awareness, gentle yet unmistakable, like a greeting whispered through the fabric of space. It felt curious, observant, calculating. The sensation was neither hostile nor welcoming, simply acknowledging that something foreign was approaching its surface for the first time in a long stretch of cosmic time. As we descended through the upper atmosphere, the silver clouds parted into intricate patterns, spiraling open as though reacting to our passage. They shifted with deliberate elegance, revealing vast stretches of luminous ocean stretching to the horizon. Every wave carried a glimmer that danced like bioluminescent signals, communicating in a language too complex for human thought. I felt an unease bloom inside me, not from fear, but from understanding. This was no ordinary planet. Life here was not limited to biological forms. The planet itself was an entity, a vast, breathing intelligence older than any story humanity had ever written. It recognized the alien beside me. And now, impossibly, it recognized me as well. TRAPPIST-1e was not merely a world. It was a mind. And I was descending into its awareness. The descent ended not with impact, not with the jarring sensation of arrival, but with a slow merging into a surface that felt more like skin than soil. My awareness drifted downward until the luminous clouds closed above me like a curtain, revealing a landscape unlike anything the human mind was ever meant to reconcile. The ground beneath us was warm, not from sunlight or geothermal heat, but from an inner pulse that radiated through every particle. It thrummed with a steady rhythm, so subtle it was almost musical, as if the very crust of the planet inhaled and exhaled in long, ancient breaths. I touched down without the weight of a physical body, yet I felt the ground respond to me. Not in the symbolic way one might imagine from a dream, but in a tangible shift, like a living membrane adjusting to pressure. The surface flexed, recognizing the presence of something foreign. A faint vibration traveled outward from the point where I stood, as though the planet were sending a ripple through its own nervous system, announcing my arrival to whatever listened beneath. The alien beside me remained still, his energy blending with the landscape in a way that suggested familiarity. The ground reacted differently to him, not with caution, but with recognition. The vibrations deepened, forming layered harmonics that echoed through the environment. It was not sound, it was memory. The planet remembered him, and by extension, it now tried to understand me. The terrain stretched out in all directions in gentle waves, like an endless field of shimmering dunes sculpted from living crystal. Each ridge pulsed faintly, glowing from within, illuminating patterns that pulsed in synchronized rhythms. I realized the patterns were not random. They were sequences, cycles, the planetary equivalent of thought. The ground beneath my awareness shifted through colors that responded to proximity, adjusting to the presence of two beings who did not belong here. I felt something move beneath the surface, not physically but energetically, like an immense intelligence shifting in its sleep. The sensation swept through me, probing gently, curious but cautious. The alien remained unshaken, his presence radiating calm permission, signaling to the planet that I was not an intruder. The response was immediate. The light intensities across the terrain shifted, rippling outward in concentric waves. The temperature of the ground warmed, embracing rather than testing. And the faint hum of memory deepened, filling the air with impressions I could feel but not decipher. Images flickered at the edge of thought. Not visuals exactly, but impressions from epochs long gone. Movements of beings who once walked here. Echoes of their presence left behind like fingerprints in the consciousness of a world that does not forget. It was then I understood that TRAPPIST-1e was not merely aware of us. It was trying to communicate. Its recognition was not passive. It was intentional. The planet perceived identity not through appearance or matter, but through the resonance of awareness. It knew the alien, and now it sifted through me, searching for something familiar, something buried, perhaps something inherited from a history humanity no longer remembered or chose to forget. Each pulse of the living ground carried a message without words, a whisper from a consciousness spread across oceans, continents, and mountains that breathed. The planet was not reacting to strangers, it was reacting to descendants. And for reasons I could not yet understand, it greeted me with the wary recognition of a mind that had seen my kind before. TRAPPIST-1e remembered us, and it remembered why we had once come. The landscape seemed to shift in subtle waves, guiding us toward a structure that rose from the living terrain with the silent grace of something that had grown rather than been built. It emerged from the ground as though the planet itself had shaped it in response to our presence, a towering formation of smooth, luminous material that pulsed gently with inner light. There were no seams, no edges, no signs of construction. It curved upward in sweeping arcs, resembling a colossal shell carved by the hands of time itself. Every inch of its surface radiated memory. As we approached, the structure responded to the alien's presence first. Its glow deepened, becoming warmer, almost reverent. Then, in a slower, more cautious rhythm, it acknowledged me. A faint tremor rippled through the ground. Colors shifted across the structure's surface, arranging themselves into patterns that felt like a greeting, or perhaps a test. A threshold opened before us without sound, the material peeling apart in fluid layers that moved like petals unfolding to reveal a hidden core. Inside, the temperature changed immediately. The air felt thick with meaning, a density not of heat, but of history. The interior chamber was vast, stretching out in a dome so high I could not see its apex. Walls curved in perfect symmetry, each one shimmering with translucent layers of light that seemed to breathe. The entire space thrummed gently, not with noise, but with resonance, as though every surface held an echo waiting to be awakened. The alien stepped forward, and the hall responded instantly. Waves of light cascaded down the walls, and the space bloomed with holographic forms that materialized like memories coming into focus. They were not projections in the human sense. They were impressions woven from the planet's own consciousness, crafted from ancient encounters preserved through ages beyond human reckoning. Figures appeared, each one formed from shimmering strands of luminescent energy. Some were tall and human-like, others more abstract, their forms bending in ways the human body could never achieve. They stood in silent formation across the vast chamber, each echo a preserved imprint of a being who had once walked on Earth. Their presence was palpable, more than reflections, yet less than souls, lingering as if waiting to be remembered. As the images sharpened, I recognized patterns in their shapes, hints of depictions found in human myths and religious iconography across civilizations separated by oceans and centuries. Winged beings from ancient Mesopotamia, luminous visitors carved into temple walls in India, figures surrounded by halos of fire described by desert prophets, beings etched into the stone of forgotten South American ruins. Every vision humanity once attributed to gods or angels transformed here into a clear, undeniable lineage. Then, among them, another group appeared. These forms were more refined, their silhouettes closer to human shape, but radiating a resonance that set them apart. They moved with calm authority, their gestures serene, their light softer yet more profound. It was obvious these were the last of the visitors to stand upon earth before withdrawing, the ones whose teachings had seeded the roots of early spirituality. Their echoes pulsed with a quiet sorrow, as though they carried the memory of a mission unfinished, a message distorted by the fragile minds of the humans who received it. The hall held them all, every visitor across thousands of years, preserved not as deities, not as myths, but as travelers whose presence had once altered the arc of human consciousness. I felt the weight of their collective history pressing against my awareness, each echo a reminder of truths humanity once glimpsed and then buried under layers of fear, reverence, and misunderstanding. This was no temple, no museum. It was a memory chamber, a living archive of cosmic teachers whose footsteps shaped the earliest human beliefs. And now, standing where none of my kind had stood in ages, I felt the chamber evaluating me, as though deciding whether I was ready to see the final echoes that waited deeper within. The hall remembered them, and it was preparing to remember me. The echoes in the chamber continued their silent procession, each one shimmering with the soft radiance of a memory preserved by a planet that had watched countless civilizations rise and fall. The alien's presence beside me shifted, not in form, but in gravity. Something within him grew heavier, more solemn, as though the next truth he intended to reveal carried a weight even he rarely shared. The hall's light dimmed slightly, allowing the holographic figures to glow brighter, their forms sharpening until they hovered between past and present with unnerving clarity. My awareness gravitated toward the central cluster of figures. They stood closer to human in appearance, though taller, more symmetrical, their proportions imbued with a grace that felt crafted rather than evolved. Their faces were calm, their expressions patient. I sensed a continuity in them, a lineage carried through ages so vast it made human history feel like a fleeting shadow. Their silhouettes pulsed faintly, vibrating with a frequency that stirred something deep in my memory. Not personal memory, something older, something inherited. The alien's meaning unfurled through my consciousness in a single sweeping truth. These beings were messengers, not gods, not angels, not spirits born from human imagination. They were travelers who came to Earth at intervals across millennia, each one arriving during moments when humanity stood at the edge of collapse or awakening. They brought guidance, not commandments, knowledge, not doctrine. Their purpose had always been to nudge human consciousness forward, to remind a species with fragile memory of truths it repeatedly forgot. But humanity, blinded by fear and awe, transformed their teachings into myths. Their names became tangled in legend, their shapes immortalized in carvings, scriptures, and stories twisted through generations. What began as instruction became worship. What began as knowledge became dogma. And the lineage of messengers watched from afar as each attempt to elevate humanity was diluted by the very minds they tried to free. Then one more figure formed among the echoes. His light was different, softer, warmer, resonating on a frequency that struck directly into the core of my awareness. His shape approached the human form more closely than the others, yet carried a depth that set him apart from every being in the hall. The surrounding echoes responded to him, their glow intensifying in reverence. Not because he was above them, but because the role he took upon himself had no equal. The alien allowed me to feel the truth before he shared it fully. Jesus had not been the first messenger. He had walked a path laid by countless predecessors whose names Earth had forgotten. But he had also been the only one to fully understand how dangerously lost humanity had become. Spiritual amnesia had taken root in every culture, every empire, every attempt at enlightenment. Humanity remembered the symbols, but forgot the meaning behind them. Remembered the rituals, but lost the inner transformation. Remembered the messenger, but twisted the message. Jesus saw the depth of that forgetting. He recognized the risk of a species that believed itself separate from its source. And unlike the messengers before him, he refused to simply deliver teachings and withdraw. He dove deeper into human vulnerability than any of them had dared, embodying the message rather than merely conveying it. He lived as the example. He allowed himself to suffer, not as sacrifice, but as demonstration. He tried to shock humanity awake, to shake their souls from the sleep that had lasted far too long. He knew the danger of spiritual blindness, not physical death, not sin, but the collapse that comes when a civilization loses sight of its own divine origin. And he knew that without intervention, humanity would reach a point where forgetting would lead not only to suffering, but to extinction of consciousness itself. The alien let the weight of this settle into me. The lineage of messengers had not ended with Jesus. Others came after him, but the world was no longer listening. Humanity had locked itself inside rigid doctrines, unable to hear the very truth the teacher had tried to reveal. And now, standing in a hall of echoes on a living planet far from home, I understood why I had been brought here. The lineage had not ended, but humanity had forgotten the message once more. And the cost of forgetting this time would be far greater than the world was ready to face. The hall shifted around me as though the planet itself had taken a slow, deliberate breath. The echoes dimmed, their luminous forms withdrawing into the walls like memories returning to sleep. A new pathway revealed itself as the ground curved open, forming a gentle descent that led deeper into the living architecture of TRAPPIST-1e. The alien's presence guided me forward, though he did not move in any way I could understand. The space reacted to him, and because I remained tethered to his awareness, it reacted to me as well. The further we traveled, the heavier the air became. Not physically, but in a way that pressed on the inner layers of my consciousness. The walls glowed faintly, with shifting patterns that resembled veins of light, carrying energy through the structure like blood coursing through an ancient organism. Every pulse resonated with a frequency that stirred something inside me, something I had not felt since the night my heart once stopped beating. It was the unmistakable whisper of the threshold between life and death. At the end of the passage stood a sealed chamber. It was smaller than the Hall of Echoes, yet radiated a gravity far more intense. Its surface resembled polished stone, but the texture rippled like liquid light, trapped in a solid form. No opening, no doorway, no visible mechanism. It was a sealed mind, indifferent to the living. The alien allowed me to sense the truth. This chamber responded only to those who had crossed the boundary at least once. Not fully, not permanently, but enough to loosen the binding between consciousness and flesh. Enough for the soul to retain a faint resonance of the other side. I felt the memory of that night rise from the depths of my awareness. The bright hospital lights, the fading heartbeat, the stillness, the sudden cold, the drifting, the voice that was not a voice promising I would return. The chamber listened. At first I felt nothing. Then, like a ripple traveling across a still lake, the surface of the sealed structure trembled. A low resonance spread outward, passing through me with the softness of a breath and the weight of an ocean. It recognized something in me that I had tried for years to bury. The imprint of my near death, the echo of that moment when my consciousness had briefly stepped outside the limits of my mortal frame. The wall parted, not by sliding or breaking, but by dissolving into threads of luminous vapor that peeled away, revealing a hollow interior filled with swirling layers of pale blue light. The chamber accepted me because I had died once, even if only for a handful of heartbeats. That single brush with the threshold had marked me in a way no human could see, but this place knew instantly. As I stepped forward, the air brightened, becoming almost tactile, brushing against my awareness like fingertips made of memory. This was not a room. It was a test. A place where only those who had glimpsed the other side were allowed to stand. I felt it examining me, not with hostility but with profound scrutiny, as though determining whether I was willing to remember what death had once shown me. And as the chamber closed behind me, sealing me inside its living light, I understood that whatever waited within was not meant for the living. It was meant for those who had already crossed the line and returned carrying a question. A question I had been trying to forget ever since the night I first asked it. Why was I sent back? The chamber's interior pulsed with a pale blue radiance that felt almost liquid, as though I had stepped into the heart of a star wrapped in soft breath. The air shimmered with energy that brushed against my awareness, like strands of memory trying to take shape. For a moment, there was only silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something waiting, watching, remembering. Gradually, the light in the center of the chamber thickened, condensing into a vertical column that rose from floor to ceiling. At first, it appeared to be a simple beam, a radiant pillar vibrating with soft waves. But as it rotated, a new shape emerged from within its glow. 4 elongated extensions radiated outward, each one spinning slowly, forming what looked unmistakably like a cross suspended in midair. Its brilliance was almost overwhelming, yet strangely gentle, as if designed not to blind, but to reveal. The sight struck me with a weight I could feel in the deepest part of my awareness. The form was familiar, too familiar, echoing an image that humanity had carried for thousands of years. A symbol carved into stone, painted on walls, hung around necks, etched into the foundations of belief across continents. But here, in this alien chamber on a living world far beyond Earth, the shape felt wrong. Not false, not misleading, simply incomplete, like a story told from only one perspective. The cross rotated more slowly, allowing its true structure to unfold. The extensions lengthened, then bent, then split into multiple segments that expanded outward like unfolding branches. Depth formed where flatness had been. Angles sharpened into curves. Planes became corridors of light. The shape expanded until it was no longer a cross at all, but a three-dimensional lattice that spiraled inward and outward at the same time, forming a geometric constellation too complex for human eyes to fully follow. Only when it reached full rotation did I see its purpose. It was a star map. The lines of light connected in a pattern that mirrored the TRAPPIST system. In the center, a dim red glow pulsed gently, marking the star that anchored the 7 worlds. Around it, curved lines of resonance that represented the orbital harmonics I had witnessed earlier. Each glowing strand extended outward to form a network of coordinates that converged on a single luminous point. TRAPPIST-1e. The map pointed directly to it, as though marking a destination that had been chosen long before humans existed. The resemblance to the cross was not coincidence, it was origin. A symbol misunderstood, simplified, reshaped by cultures that had no context for the cosmic geometry they were trying to interpret. What humanity had carved into its scriptures and temples had once been a map, a guide, a reminder of where the messengers had come from. As the map turned, the chamber filled with low resonances that trembled through my awareness like ancient voices murmuring beneath water. I felt impressions more than meanings, whispers of past visits, reminders of early humans staring at shapes in the sky they could not comprehend. Beings who tried to teach through imagery, offering symbols that could survive generations even when their real meaning was forgotten. The rotation slowed and the luminous map pulsed once, sending a wave through the chamber that pressed into my consciousness with a quiet message. Remember this. Not the cross as Earth remembers it, but the shape beneath it. The truth it originally pointed toward, the origin of the teachers and the path they traveled. The cross had never been a symbol of one man's suffering. It had been a coordinate, a direction, a cosmic signature burned into human memory, so that one day, when the world was ready, the truth behind it could finally be recognized. And as I stood, bathed in its shifting glow, I understood with chilling clarity that humanity had never been ready for the truth the symbol once held. But I was going to see it anyway. The chamber dimmed as the star map dissolved into drifting particles of light, each fragment hovering in the air like embers suspended in a vacuum. The alien's presence expanded beside me, not in form, but in gravity, as though the truth he was about to reveal required an atmosphere different from anything the living world could provide. The walls brightened with a soft inner glow, resonating in slow rhythmic waves, and I sensed that the chamber itself prepared for what I was meant to hear. This was not information. This was initiation. The alien's meaning flowed into my awareness with a depth that felt like descending into an ocean of memory. He allowed me to feel fragments first, impressions drawn from a history humanity had long buried beneath layers of myth and fear. A presence walking among ancient deserts, a voice that carried through crowds not through sound, but through a frequency that bypassed ears entirely. Hands touching the sick and altering patterns in their bodies, the way a tuning fork reshapes water. Eyes that saw not flesh, but vibration. The truth emerged slowly, with the weight of something forbidden. Jesus' abilities had never been supernatural. They were not miracles in the sense humanity understood. They were resonance manipulations. Physics so advanced that to early civilizations they appeared indistinguishable from magic. Every act recorded in Scripture, every moment retold for generations, had been the outward expression of a mastery Earth could not yet comprehend. He healed by aligning frequencies. He walked on water by altering surface tension with controlled vibrational fields. He transformed matter, not by breaking natural laws, but by operating from the deeper laws beneath them. He had been taught, prepared, not born with divine exemption, but created as a bridge between two states of existence. He carried within him the memory of those who came before, and the burden of knowing humanity had fallen into a spiritual amnesia so deep that its next collapse would be irreversible. His purpose was not salvation from sin. It was recalibration of consciousness, a realignment of a species drifting too far from its source, a last attempt to awaken a world that had forgotten how to hear anything beyond its own noise. The alien let me sense the gravity of this revelation. Jesus was part of a lineage, but unlike the messengers who preceded him, he understood the full danger. Humanity had begun to weaponize knowledge and bend truth into tools of control. Empires rose by silencing their own spiritual intuition. The teachings of earlier visitors had fractured into competing myths. The message had become a battleground instead of a path. Jesus knew humanity was nearing a point of no return, so he descended deeper into human experience than any messenger ever had. He felt hunger, fear, pain, joy, loss. He allowed himself to occupy the fragility of human flesh so he could speak to humanity from within its own limitations. His life was a living demonstration of what consciousness could be when aligned with truth rather than fear. But humanity misunderstood him completely. They saw power where he demonstrated unity. They saw salvation where he offered evolution. They saw divinity where he revealed resonance. They turned teachings into rituals, frequencies into symbols, physics into mythology. And when he died, his message was pulled apart by hands that feared its implications. The recalibration he attempted shifted only a fraction of what it was meant to. The world changed, yes, but not enough. The alien allowed this realization to settle into me like a slow-burning ember. Jesus had not come to save humanity. He had come to remind it of what it already was, a species capable of awakening, a consciousness capable of expansion, a fragment of something greater that had forgotten its own origin. His purpose had not been to lead humanity away from death, but to lead it back to itself. And standing in that chamber of living light, I finally understood why I had been brought to TRAPPIST-1. The recalibration he began was never completed. And now, impossibly, fate had circled back to finish what he could not. The chamber darkened until only a faint glow traced the contours of its living walls. Then a ripple spread across the floor like a stone dropped into still water, and from that ripple, a holographic field began to rise. It formed slowly, as though woven from strands of memory hidden deep within the consciousness of the planet itself. The air grew denser, thick with anticipation, as if the truth about to be shown was something the world had guarded for millennia. I sensed the alien step back, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. This part, he wanted the chamber to tell itself. Light unfolded into shape, and within moments, the scene solidified. A vision of ancient earth, dusty ground, a soft, dry wind. People gathered, their robes shifting like small waves in the breeze. I recognized the landscape from paintings and stories, though never like this. It breathed, it pulsed, it carried a frequency that felt almost familiar, like a dream half remembered. At the center stood Jesus, not the stylized figure depicted in churches, not the pale and static icon shaped by centuries of revision and cultural sculpting. This was a living being, radiating a resonance that vibrated through the holographic space like a silent song. His presence commanded attention without force. His movements created ripples in the air. Every gesture carried intention. Then I heard it, not with ears, but with something deeper, a frequency layered beneath the fabric of sound itself. When he opened his mouth, the words that emerged were not words at all. They were waves, pulses, vibrational patterns that shaped thought directly. They bypassed language entirely. They reached straight into consciousness, into the parts of the mind that existed before speech, before logic, before fear. The frequency was gentle yet overwhelming, like being submerged in warm water that carried truth instead of heat. And the people around him understood none of it. Their faces twisted in confusion. Their eyes darted between one another, searching for meaning where their minds had no framework to receive it. What reached their ears was only the faint outer shell of his communication, like watching thunder without hearing lightning. They sensed something profound happening, but they could not grasp its substance. Their minds filled the gaps with interpretations shaped by their own fears, hopes, and cultural symbols. They turned resonance into metaphor. They turned physics into myth. They turned a universal teaching into a personal salvation narrative because it was all they could comprehend. The hologram shifted, showing those same listeners later, repeating fragments of what they believed they had heard. Each retelling twisted the meaning further, stretching it until it resembled something entirely different. A teaching meant to awaken expanded consciousness became a doctrine meant to enforce obedience. A message about unity transformed into a structure of hierarchy. A reminder of divine connection became a declaration of divine separation. The roots of religion grew not from what Jesus taught, but from what his followers failed to understand. Their misinterpretations spread like wildfire. Empires adopted them. Leaders reshaped them to control populations. Scribes rewrote teachings to fit political narratives. The original resonance was lost, buried under centuries of human noise, assumptions, fear, and power. The chamber projected the consequences like a silent confession. Wars fought over ideas Jesus never spoke. Persecutions carried out in his name. Entire civilizations divided along lines, drawn by misunderstandings. People worshiping symbols without knowing their origins, praying to a man whose true message had slipped through their fingers before they ever realized it existed. The alien allowed me to witness the collapse of meaning, the fragmentation of a truth too large for early human minds to hold. The misinterpretation was not intentional, it was inevitable. Humanity understood only what its consciousness could process, and so an awakening meant for the species became a religion built on partial echoes and shadows. The hologram faded, leaving me standing in the soft blue glow of the chamber. The silence felt heavy, not with regret, but with the knowledge that history itself had been shaped not by truth, but by the limitations of those who heard it. And I understood then why the messengers had stopped coming. Humanity was not ready for the message. But now, standing in an alien chamber on a living world, I sensed the truth rising within me like a tide. The message was returning, and this time, the world would not be able to ignore it. The chamber brightened with a muted gold glow, as if the walls themselves prepared to unveil a truth that had lain dormant for thousands of years. The air felt heavier, thick with a mixture of sorrow and inevitability, as though the planet remembered this chapter of human history with a weight too ancient to fully express. The alien's presence deepened beside me, not in form, but in gravity, signaling that what I was about to witness was not merely history, but a turning point that altered the trajectory of an entire species. The holographic field rose again, but this time the images did not form slowly. They erupted, as if the memory itself could not be contained any longer. I saw a hillside beneath a pale sky, a crowd gathered in a mixture of fear, anger, and confusion. The scene was familiar from countless depictions, yet utterly foreign. The shapes were real, the air trembled with energy, and the man at the center radiated a frequency that made the entire vision feel alive. Jesus stood suspended between the living and the dying, his body weakened, trembling not from suffering alone, but from the immense strain of what he was preparing to do. His awareness was expanded far beyond the physical world. I could feel it. He existed in dual perception, sensing both the agony of flesh and the boundless calm of the consciousness that extended beyond it. His eyes did not hold fear. They held clarity, as though he saw the outcome not in hours or days, but across generations. The alien's meaning slipped into me like a whisper of cold air. Jesus had not been killed as punishment. He had allowed his body to reach the point of dissolution because he needed humanity to witness something no scripture could ever fully explain. He wanted them to see the moment of separation, the release, the undeniable truth that consciousness does not die with the body, that life continues beyond the final breath, not as metaphor, but as a literal unfolding. The hologram magnified the moment of death, not the violence, not the anguish, the transition. His final breath left his body like a soft ripple of light. At that exact instant, the air around him shimmered. A separation occurred, delicate yet unmistakable, like a thin membrane tearing. His consciousness rose, luminous and intact, hovering above the lifeless form that still bore the marks of human cruelty. The world around him froze. Time did not stop, but human perception failed to comprehend the event unfolding before them. No one saw it. No one, except those with eyes tuned to resonance. The alien allowed me to feel the full magnitude of that instant. Jesus was demonstrating, not dying. He was revealing the truth of existence through the only method humans could not misinterpret: a visual, undeniable separation of self from flesh. His reappearance days later was not a miracle. It was simply the continuation of consciousness returning briefly to make certain the message had been delivered. Yet even then, those who witnessed him misunderstood. They took the demonstration as proof of divinity rather than proof of the nature of consciousness itself. What had been intended as liberation became the seed of doctrine. What had been shown as universal truth became an exclusionary narrative. The very act meant to free humanity from fear became the foundation of a system built on it. The hologram dimmed, leaving only the lingering resonance of that moment, as though the chamber itself mourned the misinterpretation. Jesus had not died for humanity's sins. He had died to show humanity what death truly was. A transition, a continuation, a doorway. He had tried to illuminate the path, but the world had seen only the symbol, never the meaning. And as the final flicker of the vision dissolved into the chamber's soft blue light, I felt the weight of that lost message press against my awareness like a truth waiting centuries to be understood again. The chamber darkened until every trace of blue light was extinguished, leaving only a low, pulsing warmth that felt like the heartbeat of the planet itself. For a few moments nothing appeared, and I wondered if this memory was too heavily guarded, too deeply buried even for a world like TRAPPIST-1e to reveal. Then a single point of light ignited in the center of the room. It grew slowly, like an ember coaxed back to flame, expanding until an entire scene unfolded around me in a clarity that made my chest tighten. I was watching the days after the crucifixion, not the fragments passed down in scripture, not the stories polished through centuries of interpretation. These were the raw, unfiltered events that human history had tried desperately to silence. The air shimmered with the frequency of a truth hidden for thousands of years. Jesus appeared first, not as a ghostly figure or apparition, but fully present. His form radiated a soft, stabilizing luminosity, as though his physical body had been reassembled from the same resonance he had mastered in life. He walked not with the frailty of someone recently dead, but with the calm assurance of a being who had crossed a boundary and returned without fear. His consciousness moved effortlessly between the physical and the non-physical, flickering at the edges, like light bending through water. The scene widened. He was not alone. Shapes descended from the sky, not dramatic, not fiery, but with the silent grace of beings accustomed to moving between worlds. They emerged from subtle distortions in the air, their forms materializing with the same ease as one breath following another. Their silhouettes shimmered with geometric patterns that shifted across their bodies like living constellations. They were unmistakably non-human, yet their presence felt familiar, as though they belonged to the same lineage that had shaped human consciousness long before recorded time. Jesus greeted them with the calmness of someone reuniting with old companions. The resonance of their communication filled the chamber, vibrating with a complexity that made my awareness tremble. It was not speech, it was alignment, a merging of intention. They had come to ensure the message had been delivered. They had come to discuss what had failed. The hologram shifted again, revealing quiet gatherings in remote places far from the crowds. Jesus walked with these beings beyond the sight of his followers. They reviewed the distortions already taking shape, the misunderstandings forming in the minds of those who believed they were witnessing divine magic rather than physics of higher dimensions. The visitors knew what was coming. They had seen this pattern before on other worlds. When truth meets fear, fear reshapes it into something smaller, something easier to control. Then came the part humanity was never meant to forget, yet religious leaders ensured it was erased. Those 7 days were filled with teachings meant not for the masses, but for the few who could hold the resonance without distorting it. He demonstrated how consciousness could detach at will, how matter responded to intention, how love was not emotion but force, and how the universe responded to the frequency of one's inner state. These lessons were witnessed, but they were not understood. And some who saw them feared what widespread knowledge would do. Empires could not be built on empowered minds. Control could not thrive where consciousness awakened. So when Jesus departed for the final time, returning to the dimension from which he had come, those who stood to lose power stepped forward. They recorded selectively. They omitted deliberately. They altered words to align with earthly authority. And the 7 days when Jesus walked openly with beings not of earth vanished from Scripture like smoke erased from the wind. The chamber pulsed as the last image dissolved. A profound silence settled over me. heavier than any truth I had been shown so far. Humanity had not simply misunderstood the resurrection. It had been denied the most important part of it, the part where Jesus revealed the true nature of the universe, and the part where he proved that he was never alone. The chamber shifted again, not with the sudden illumination of previous revelations, but with a soft, inward folding of light, as if the room itself were drawing a long, contemplative breath. The walls brightened, then dimmed in slow waves, echoing the rhythm of a truth that had been buried for longer than human history dared to count. The alien's presence grew quieter, almost reverent, as though even he understood that what came next was not simply knowledge, but a forbidden inheritance. The holographic field rose, but this time the images were different. They did not form scenes or landscapes. Instead, they unfolded as patterns, spiraling shapes, and radiant geometries that pulsed like living equations. They expanded, then contracted, each shift resonating through my awareness with a meaning that bypassed language entirely. I felt as though my mind was being tuned, aligned gently to perceive something it had always been capable of seeing but had forgotten how to recognize. Gradually, within those patterns, a figure emerged. Jesus stood at the center of the shifting light, not as a teacher addressing a crowd, but as a being revealing the deepest truth of human existence. His form flickered between physical and luminous, as though he existed in multiple layers of reality at once. When he extended his hand, the patterns responded instantly, expanding outward in spirals that resembled neural pathways stretching across the cosmos. The chamber allowed me to feel the truth behind the vision. Jesus had not come to earth to create a religion. He had come to remind humanity of what it already was. Every human consciousness was a fragment of a greater intelligence, a vast cosmic mind that spanned dimensions the physical senses could not perceive. Humans were not small. Humans were not separate. They were expressions of a universal force, capable of resonance far beyond the limitations of their current evolution. Jesus had tried to demonstrate this through example, not doctrine. He showed telepathic communication not as miracle, but as natural ability. He moved between locations not by defying physics, but by using a physics Earth had not yet discovered. He attempted to teach that consciousness could ascend, shifting into frequencies that allowed interaction with non-physical dimensions. His message was simple, yet infinitely profound. Humans were not merely observers of the universe. They were participants in its creation. They were extensions of the same intelligence that gave rise to stars, planets, and the very beings who once walked among them. But this message was dangerous, not because it threatened morality or belief, but because it threatened those who sought control. A humanity aware of its true nature could not be ruled through fear. It could not be divided by doctrine. It could not be manipulated by systems built on the illusion of separation. So the message was hidden, diluted, transformed into metaphor. And over time, it became the very opposite of what it had originally been. Instead of awakening humanity, the story was molded to keep it asleep. The hologram shifted, showing groups of early followers struggling to interpret his teachings. Their minds could grasp only fragments of what he demonstrated. Concepts like multidimensional travel sounded like magic. Telepathy resembled prophecy. Ascension became an unattainable reward instead of an innate ability. And slowly, the message drifted away from its source. What Jesus had tried to reveal was not salvation, but remembrance. He came to awaken the memory of a cosmic lineage encoded within every human mind. A lineage that stretched back to the origins of consciousness itself. A lineage that, if remembered, would shatter the illusion of separateness that plagued humanity. The chamber dimmed once more, leaving me in a vast silence that felt almost holy. The truth settled into me like a weight I had no words for. Humans were never meant to worship Jesus. They were meant to become what he showed them they already were. fragments of a much greater mind, creators who had forgotten they could create, travelers who had forgotten they could travel, beings of resonance who had mistaken themselves for bodies, and standing on an alien world beneath a living ceiling of light, I realized with a chill that the message humanity was never meant to keep was the very message it now desperately needed to remember. The chamber's glow dimmed into a soft twilight, as though even the living walls hesitated before releasing the memory held in their depths. A tension gathered in the air, not hostile, but solemn, like the quiet before a storm that has taken centuries to reach the horizon. The alien's presence pressed gently against my awareness, preparing me for something the planet itself regarded with caution. Then the holographic field rose once more, not in vibrant light this time, but in muted, shifting shadows that carried the weight of warning. Images formed slowly, as if the memory resisted being seen. When they finally sharpened, Jesus stood at the center, his expression lined not with fear, but with an ache that came from seeing too far ahead. His resonance fluctuated in a way that suggested a burden no human could carry. The patterns behind him shimmered like ripples on dark water, revealing glimpses of a future he had tried desperately to prevent. The chamber allowed me to feel fragments of what he foresaw. Cities of towering lights humming with machines that consumed more attention than the people who built them. Minds buried beneath endless streams of information, yet starving for meaning. Humanity wrapped in the illusion of connection while becoming more isolated than ever before. I saw glowing screens replacing inner stillness, algorithms shaping belief, and voices shouting so loudly that truth became indistinguishable from noise. Jesus had warned of an age when humanity's technological abilities would outpace its spiritual maturity. When knowledge without wisdom would swell into something monstrous. When tools meant to enhance life would instead hollow it from within. The images flickered past like nightmares carved into light. People spiraling into existential fatigue, seeking identity in fractured echo chambers. Children born into a world where silence was feared more than violence. Nations growing powerful but spiritually desolate, their advancements built on foundations that could not hold. He had tried to speak of this, not in prophetic riddles, but in teachings humanity could not comprehend. He spoke of the dangers of externalizing worth, of worshiping structures instead of inner truth, of mistaking information for understanding. His words were seeds meant to prepare humanity for the critical age to come. But the people around him, limited by the fears and paradigms of their time, interpreted his warnings as metaphors, moral lessons, or distant spiritual allegories. They could not imagine the magnitude of what he had seen. The chamber showed me flashes of leaders throughout history editing texts, reshaping teachings, stripping away anything that challenged authority. The warnings Jesus gave about the future were softened, obscured, or removed entirely. What remained were fragments, hints buried in parables, diluted so completely that generations read them without recognizing the urgency they once carried. Then the vision shifted. I saw the present age reflected through the chamber's understanding. Humanity standing at a precipice, armed with unimaginable technology but starved of meaning. Capable of reaching the stars, yet incapable of reaching inward. Creating artificial intelligence while forgetting the intelligence of the soul. Building virtual worlds while losing touch with the one that lived in their bodies. The prophecy Jesus delivered was unfolding exactly as he feared, not through divine punishment, but through the natural consequences of forgetting who and what humans truly were. The alien's presence reinforced the truth. Jesus had not warned of fire from the sky or divine wrath. He had warned of a collapse of consciousness, a spiritual implosion born from imbalance, a crisis that would not destroy humanity by force, but by emptiness. If humans continued down this path, civilization would not fall in a single dramatic catastrophe, but slowly, through a decay of meaning so subtle that most would not notice until it was almost complete. The hologram dimmed into the chamber's soft blue light once more. I felt the weight of the prophecy settle over me like a shadow cast across centuries. Jesus had seen this coming. He had tried to change the trajectory, but humanity had misunderstood the warning, just as it had misunderstood the message. And now the world stood on the edge of the moment he feared most. The chamber released me with a soft exhale of light, and the floor beneath my awareness shifted, opening into a spiraling descent that guided us deeper into the living planet. The alien moved effortlessly, while I drifted beside him, feeling the gravity of some vast unseen truth pulling us downward. The walls of the passage glowed faintly, illuminating our descent in shimmering currents that resembled veins carrying memory instead of blood. With every layer we passed, the air grew thicker, denser, with meaning, as if the planet were preparing me for something it rarely allowed any consciousness to witness. The passage widened into a cavern so immense that its boundaries dissolved into shadow. A cold, silvery mist hovered near the ground, moving in slow eddies as though stirred by thoughts rather than wind. The ceiling pulsed with dim light, revealing structures that resembled roots of an enormous organism extending through the rock above. Their glow traveled downward, pooling toward the center of the cavern where the ground fell away into a vast, circular basin. At the bottom of that basin lay a lake. Not water, not liquid in any ordinary sense. A shimmering expanse of reflective plasma stretched out before us, glowing with a depth that made it seem both infinite and impossibly shallow at the same time. Its surface rippled gently, though nothing touched it. Light moved across it in currents that resembled living memories, drifting within a consciousness far older than Earth itself. The alien's presence steadied me, and I sensed the truth before he revealed it. This was the Mirror Lake, a place where the planet reflected not images, but truths, not personal truths, collective truths, the unfiltered resonance of humanity's past, present, and potential. As I drew closer, the lake awakened. Its surface darkened, then brightened, then burst into a storm of shifting visions that struck with the force of revelations too heavy for human minds. I saw suffering first, not isolated acts, but an ocean of pain stretching across centuries. Wars fought for illusions, children starving in shadows cast by the wealth of the powerful, families torn apart by systems built on fear rather than compassion. The lake showed every cruelty, not as accusation, but as truth. Cold and impartial, the visions shifted without pause, revealing corruption embedded in every layer of human civilization. Leaders hiding their hunger for power behind polished words, institutions built on control rather than wisdom, species devouring its own future in the name of progress, humanity stumbling blindly through cycles it refused to see, repeating patterns that carved deeper wounds with every generation. Then, just as the weight became almost unbearable, the lake changed again. It revealed potential. Not hypothetical futures, but the ones humanity had already been capable of achieving and had forgotten. I saw moments of unity so rare they almost looked like miracles. Individuals who reached beyond fear and touched a higher resonance. Societies that could have evolved if their vision had not been suffocated by greed or forgotten in the noise of history. I saw the brilliance woven into human consciousness, the untapped power waiting just beneath the surface, dormant like a seed in frozen earth. The contrast tore through me. The suffering and corruption were real, devastatingly real. But the potential was equally undeniable. The lake showed what humanity could be if it remembered its origin, if it reclaimed the consciousness it had lost, if it chose growth over fear. The plasma rippled once more, reflecting my own awareness back at me. Not my face, not my form, my resonance. A trembling frequency, uncertain of what it had become part of. I felt the planet evaluating me, measuring me against the truths it had shown, deciding whether I would carry this knowledge or be crushed by it. The alien's presence wrapped around me like a steadying hand. The lake dimmed, its surface returning to calm. though its impressions lingered inside me like a brand. Humanity's suffering, humanity's corruption, humanity's potential, all intertwined, impossible to separate. And as the cavern's light pulsed softly in the silence that followed, I understood why the planet had brought me here. Before one can change a species, one must first see it without illusion. The cavern tightened around me as though the living planet had drawn a long, deliberate breath and was now holding it, waiting to see what I would do next. The mirror lake grew still, its reflective plasma hardening into a surface so smooth it resembled a sheet of frozen moonlight. The alien's presence retreated a step, not to abandon me, but to remove all influence. This next part, I sensed, allowed no guidance, no interference, no comfort. The lake had revealed humanity's truth. Now it would reveal mine. A faint tremor pulsed beneath the ground. The air thickened until it pressed against me like the weight of an unseen depth. My awareness flickered as the cavern dimmed around the edges, pulling me into a narrowing corridor of perception. Then the mirror lake brightened, drawing my focus to its center. Light gathered and curled upward, forming a faint silhouette. My silhouette. Not my physical body, but the shape of my consciousness, carved from the resonance I carried. It stood before me like a reflection unbound by glass. And then the lake began the test. The first vision struck without warning. A memory I had buried so deeply I had forgotten it existed. A moment when I questioned the existence of God, not out of rebellion, but out of despair so sharp it had carved a hollow inside me. I watched my younger self begging the empty air for meaning, for proof that life was more than a series of accidents. The lake amplified the emotion, pulling it apart, revealing its roots not in anger, but in fear. The fear that there was nothing beyond the visible, nothing guiding, nothing waiting. The fear that death was final, silent, eternal. The cavern vibrated with the magnitude of that fear. Then the lake showed another truth, an equally unsettling one. What if everything I believed about the afterlife was wrong? What if the beings I had encountered were not guardians, but reflections of a reality far more complex than human spirituality ever dared imagine? What if consciousness was not sacred, but simply one expression in an infinite network of forms? The visions churned, pulling me through wave after wave of possibilities, each one dismantling another piece of the belief systems I had always held close. The final fear emerged last. Purpose. What if my life had none? What if every step, every choice, every moment of suffering and joy was not part of a divine plan, but the result of a universe indifferent to meaning? The lake held nothing back. It showed the raw, honest void behind the question. Not to torment me, but to strip away every illusion I carried, every story I told myself, every belief I wore like armor. The alien did not intervene. The planet did not soften the blow. It wanted me naked in my awareness, emptied of preconceptions, because truth cannot enter where certainty still clings. My consciousness collapsed inward. For a moment, I felt myself dissolving into the possibility that there was no God as I understood it, no heaven or hell in the way I imagined, no purpose assigned from above, just existence, vast, unfiltered, indifferent, infinite. The terror of that emptiness cracked through me like lightning. And then, at the very moment my fear peaked, when I felt myself folding into nothing, something softened. A presence emerged, not as voice or form, but as a current moving through the fabric of the universe. It was not a deity, not a being. It was more foundational than that. A field, a consciousness woven through everything. Not separate, not superior, simply present. It did not give answers. It did not reveal purpose. It revealed connection. Everything was part of it. Every life, every death, every question, every fear, every attempt at meaning. My fear dissolved not because I found certainty, but because I understood that certainty was never the point. Surrender was. The mirror lake dimmed, releasing me from its gaze. The cavern brightened with soft blue light, signaling that the test had ended. I had faced the possibility that everything I believed was wrong, and in letting go, I opened space for the truth waiting on the other side. The truth the alien had brought me across the stars to receive. The cavern's light shifted again, thinning into a pale radiance that drifted across the stone like mist illuminated from within. The mirror lake became still enough to resemble a sheet of polished metal, reflecting nothing, yet somehow containing everything. I felt the alien return to my side, his presence steady and deliberate, carrying the quiet weight of a truth that had shaped entire civilizations without humanity ever realizing it. The air vibrated faintly, not with sound, but with a frequency so subtle it felt like the distant echo of something I had once known but forgotten across lifetimes. The chamber responded to his presence. Lines of light awakened along the walls, pulsing in synchronized waves that expanded outward as if welcoming a memory home. The alien did not speak through language or gesture. His meaning filtered into my awareness like warm current rising through deep water. It carried the unmistakable gravity of revelation. The kingdom Jesus spoke of was never a destination. The words formed inside me before I even knew I was thinking them. Images surfaced in the chamber, delicate and luminous, showing Jesus standing among people whose faces were filled with longing for something they could not name. They believed he spoke of a paradise beyond death, a realm removed from human suffering, a divine world reserved for the worthy. But the resonance around him told a different story. He had not pointed upward when he spoke. He had pointed inward. The chamber deepened the vision. Jesus stood in a quiet place, surrounded not by crowds but by a few who earnestly sought understanding. The air rippled around him as he entered a state of alignment, his awareness shifting into the resonance he sought to teach. In that moment, reality around him bent slightly, like fabric reacting to a subtle change in weight. The space brightened with a soft, living glow. Not a miracle, a frequency. The kingdom of heaven was not a place, it was a state of consciousness. The alien allowed the chamber to replay the frequency Jesus used, a harmonic vibration that felt like harmony distilled into light. It hummed through the cavern, brushing against the edges of my awareness. My thoughts slowed, my fear quieted, something deep inside me expanded, recognizing the resonance like a forgotten language. Jesus had tried to activate this state in the people around him. His teachings were designed to elevate consciousness not socially, not intellectually, but vibrationally. He demonstrated compassion not as morality, but as frequency. He healed not as miracle, but as alignment. When he said the kingdom was within, he meant it literally. He meant the kingdom was a field of awareness humans could access at any time, if they remembered how. But humans did not understand resonance. They understood place. They understood hierarchy. They understood reward. So they reshaped his teaching into a realm far away, attainable only after death. Stripped of the immediacy he had tried to reveal, the chamber pulsed, showing how the original meaning fractured through time. Each generation carried the phrase but lost the frequency. Prayers became sound without resonance. Faith became belief without awareness. Heaven became a promised land rather than a shift in consciousness. The kingdom moved farther and farther away, not because it left humanity, but because humanity stopped tuning to it. The alien let the realization settle into me with a weight that was both painful and liberating. The frequency still existed. It had never vanished. It vibrated beneath every act of love, every moment of clarity, every breath taken in presence rather than fear. It was the quiet hum beneath existence, waiting for minds capable of remembering. Jesus had tried to awaken it, and now, as the chamber's light deepened around me, I understood why I had been brought across the stars. The kingdom was not lost, it was dormant. And the world that awaited my return had reached the moment where forgetting was no longer sustainable. The frequency would rise again. The question was whether humanity would rise with it. The chamber shifted into a stillness so absolute it felt like the entire planet had paused its breathing. The light dimmed to a faint glow, as if even TRAPPIST-1e understood that what came next required silence, reverence, and the space for a truth too heavy for ordinary awareness. The alien's presence drew closer, wrapping the edges of my consciousness with a gravity I had not felt in any of the revelations before. It was not urgency. It was not fear. It was inevitability, the feeling that I was standing at the threshold of something humanity had once been offered but never received. The planetary walls brightened, whispering with faint currents of resonance. A new holographic field emerged, its light trembling with the sensitivity of a wound unchanged by time. Within it, Jesus stood not among crowds, not healing, not teaching parables to minds incapable of holding the deeper truth. He stood alone on a barren ridge, the wind cutting across open stone. His figure flickered between physical form and luminous frequency, as if he hovered in the delicate space between dimensions. This was him in the final days, after the resurrection and before his last departure. I could feel the weight he carried then. Not sorrow, not fear, responsibility. A responsibility so vast it pressed into his spirit like a tidal force. He had completed the demonstration of consciousness beyond flesh. He had shown ascension, resonance, the truth of the kingdom within. He had attempted to teach humans how to awaken their dormant frequencies. But there was something else, something deeper, something even his closest followers were not ready to hear. His final teaching. The alien allowed the memory to unfold, not as narration, but as vibration. Jesus extended his hand, and reality bent slightly, like fabric responding to a change of pressure. Waves of resonance radiated from him, weaving patterns that resembled stars collapsing into new constellations. The teaching he tried to reveal was not verbal. It was not conceptual. It was an activation, a shift of awareness meant to unlock a higher state of consciousness in humanity, one that would be essential for a distant generation, the generation alive now. The scene darkened. I felt an ache pulse through the chamber as the truth became clear. His time was cut short, not by death, but by limitation. Human minds were not calibrated to hold the frequency of the final teaching. The ancient world lacked the intellectual, emotional, and spiritual bandwidth to understand the transformation he attempted. If he had forced it, the minds around him would have shattered under the weight of understanding. So he dispersed the knowledge into fragments, symbols, metaphors, parables, hoping they would survive long enough to reach the future. The alien filled my awareness with the rest. Jesus knew humanity would one day stand in an age where technology outran wisdom, where progress eclipsed purpose, a time when people would drown in information but starve for meaning, when the spirit would weaken, not through oppression, but through forgetfulness, when the collapse of consciousness would threaten the species more than any war ever could. Spiritual starvation. Not destruction from outside, but erosion from within. A hollowing of the soul so subtle that most would never realize it was happening until it was nearly complete. Jesus foresaw a future where humanity's greatest danger would be losing the memory of what it was, not divine, not separate, but an expression of universal intelligence. His final teaching was meant for that generation, for the ones who would face extinction of meaning rather than extinction of life. He designed the message to awaken dormant frequencies, to remind humans how to ascend consciousness, how to reconnect with the kingdom within, how to reclaim the resonance that allowed them to interact with higher dimensions. But he could not finish it. The world was not ready. The alien's presence grew heavier, as though the truth itself bent the atmosphere. The teaching had been left incomplete, waiting to be revived when the world reached the precipice he foresaw. And now, with humanity standing on the edge of that precipice, lost, confused, spiritually starved, the moment had come. The chamber whispered with a single truth, vibrating through the walls, the air, my consciousness. The final teaching had returned, and I was no longer a spectator. I had been brought here to carry what he could not finish. The chamber began to dim in a way that did not feel natural, as if the light itself were being swallowed by an invisible force rising from beneath the floor. The living walls pulsed slowly, almost mournfully, and the air thickened with a density that made every part of my awareness tighten. I sensed the transition before it happened. Something within the planet shifted its focus away from revelation and toward release. Not a gentle release, not a farewell, a mandate, a severing. The alien's presence pressed close, steadying the edges of my consciousness as if preparing me for an impact. Then the resonance of the chamber snapped. A shock wave of energy struck through me, tearing at every layer of my awareness like gravity collapsing in reverse. The ground dropped away. The air imploded. The frequencies that had supported me since my arrival shattered like fragile crystal. In an instant, I was no longer standing in the cavern, no longer surrounded by TRAPPIST-1e's living architecture, no longer wrapped in the alien's stabilizing presence. I was flung backward across a gulf that could not be measured by distance or time. It felt as though my consciousness had been hooked by something enormous and pulled with a force that defied every law the universe had ever obeyed. Light blitzed past me in violent flashes. My awareness folded inward, then outward, then splintered into fragments that reassembled in patterns I did not recognize. I had no sense of direction, no sense of form, no sense of self, only the relentless acceleration of being dragged through a collapsing passageway that seemed carved through the fabric of existence itself. A sudden, crushing weight slammed into me. My body. I hit it like an object, falling from infinite height. My chest seized. My heart convulsed. For a moment it refused to move, as if shocked by the sudden return of something it believed had already left forever. Then it jerked once, violently, and the pain tore through me like fire bursting through dry wood. Another convulsion followed, and another, each one forcing my heart to remember the rhythm of the living. My lungs burned, then spasmed, then dragged in a breath so sharp it felt like inhaling broken glass. Air flooded my body in ragged waves. My fingers twitched. My eyelids fluttered. Consciousness pressed back into nerves like molten metal filling old channels. A human heartbeat slammed through my ears. Unsteady and terrified, the weight of gravity returned, heavy and foreign. The softness of my bed pressed against my skin, suddenly too small, too constricting, too painfully physical. Every cell screamed from the shock of re-entry. I lay on my back, choking on air, shaking uncontrollably, my pulse crashing against my ribs in a rhythm that felt more frantic than alive. The room spun, shadows bending and snapping into place as my senses reconnected. For a moment, I thought I was dying for real this time, that the journey had torn some essential part of me beyond repair. Then the alien's voice unfurled through my skull. Not gentle, not distant, a command. Tell them what he could not. The words reverberated through my mind with a force that made my vision blur. They did not sound like a suggestion. They sounded like the continuation of a mission older than anything humanity had ever written. I felt the echo of the chamber's light fading inside me, leaving behind a single thread that pulsed in synchrony with my heartbeat. It was as if the moment I returned, something had been planted in the deepest part of my awareness, something I could neither remove nor ignore. My body trembled as the last residue of the alien realm dissolved from my senses. The room around me steadied. The air grew still, but my consciousness remained split, one part rooted in flesh, the other still resonating with the memory of a place that did not belong to Earth. I tried to sit up, but my limbs shook too violently. I could only lie there, staring into the dimness of my room, knowing with absolute certainty that I had been sent back, not because the experience was over, but because the message was about to begin. Tell them what he could not. The words repeated in my skull like a pulse, and I understood, with a clarity that chilled me to the bone, that the burden of an unfinished teaching had been placed squarely into my trembling human hands. I woke in my bed, but the moment consciousness settled into my body, I knew I had not truly returned. The sheets were familiar beneath my hands, the dim glow from the streetlight seeped through the blinds as it always had, and yet every detail felt wrong, hollow, like a set built to resemble my life rather than the reality I once belonged to. My breath rasped through my lungs in uneven waves, each inhale scraping against nerves that still remembered the absence of air. My heartbeat pulsed too loudly in my chest, not with the rhythm of life, but with the echo of a message beating itself into my awareness. Tell them what he could not. The alien's final words reverberated through my skull like a living presence, repeating with the steady inevitability of a ticking device lodged somewhere deep inside me. I could almost feel it, a weight behind my thoughts, a subtle pressure shaping the silence around me. I lay there, staring into the half-dark room, unable to shake the sense that the world I had returned to was somehow thinner, more fragile, as if the truth I carried pressed against the fabric of reality itself. The memories of TRAPPIST-1e unfurled behind my eyes in waves of impossible clarity. The living ground that breathed beneath my awareness, the hall of echoed prophets whose forms flickered in luminous reverence. The star map disguised as a cross, revealing the origins of a message humanity had twisted beyond recognition. And Jesus, the being who had walked earth, not to be worshipped, but to awaken. His resonance still vibrated faintly inside me, a frequency I feared would never fade. I felt as though I had swallowed a sunbeam, bright enough to illuminate the soul, but dangerous enough to burn through illusion. The truth about him settled in my chest, heavy and alive. He had not come to create religion. He had not come to divide humanity into righteous and condemned. He had come to recalibrate a species spiraling towards spiritual starvation. And we had crucified, not just the man, but the message. We had inherited a story stripped of its essence, a map erased of its coordinates, a teaching broken into fragments too scattered for any one life to reconstruct. Now those fragments pulsed inside me like a heartbeat not my own. As I lay still, the weight of it thickened. If people knew what I saw, what he showed, what the alien revealed, every structure of belief would collapse under the magnitude of the truth. Religion would fracture into dust. Science would scramble to rewrite its foundations. Governments would cling to control, terrified of a humanity awakened to its cosmic lineage. Entire civilizations would tremble under the realization that everything we feared, everything we worshipped, everything we thought separated us from the divine had been nothing more than misunderstanding. Humanity had not been abandoned. Humanity had forgotten. I tried to sit up. My muscles trembled from the shock of re-entry, but it was nothing compared to the tremor that ran through my mind. I felt stretched between two worlds, one foot planted on the familiar floor beside my bed, the other suspended still in that cosmic lattice before the 7 worlds of TRAPPIST. A part of me remained anchored in the resonance the alien used to pull me across the stars. A part of me still heard the murmur of the mirror lake, reflecting humanity's agony and potential. And a part of me, perhaps the part that had died once and learned to return, could not forget the final teaching meant for a generation teetering at the edge of collapse. Tell them what he could not. The words tightened around my heart like the coils of a serpent made of light. A command. A burden. A destiny I had not chosen, yet could not refuse. The truth was no longer something I had witnessed. It had fused with me. It had become a responsibility that would haunt every breath I took from this moment on. I sat in the quiet darkness of my room, the weight of the galaxy pressing against my ribs, and understood with a clarity that chilled me. I had brought something back from TRAPPIST-1e, something humanity had waited thousands of years to hear, something powerful enough to rewrite reality itself. And now the question hung in the air like a held breath. Would the world listen, or would it crucify the message all over again?